good morning to our Hudson Institute audience, and good evening to our three esteemed panelists who are all joining us from India for this Hudson discussion on the Ladakh Standoff and what it means for China-India relations. The now months-long military standoff between India and the PRC along their very long disputed Himalayan border shows right now few signs of abating. In mid-June, following a Chinese military incursion into India's Union territory of Ladakh, face-to-face fighting left 21 Indian soldiers dead and an unknown but likely far larger number of PLA troops. That clash was, of course, the worst case of open violence between the two nuclear-armed countries since Mao Zedong's PLA invaded Ladakh in 1962. Both India and the PRC have since mobilized unprecedentedly large numbers of military forces to the border area. Diplomatic talks, both between Beijing and New Delhi and at the brigade level, continue, but tensions continue also to escalate. And just recently, India prevented yet another Chinese military effort to change the status quo. What is the current situation in Ladakh, and what does India expect in coming months as efforts to de-escalate the standoff continue to be deadlocked and China refuses to back off? How has the PRC's aggression changed India's view, both in the government and in the public, of China and the intentions of China's ruling Communist Party? Myself and we at Hudson Institute are honored to have three distinguished Indian scholars to share their perspectives with all of us today. Ambassador Punchak Stobdan is a scholar, diplomat, and author, and the founding president of the Ladakh International Center in Leh. He has served as India's ambassador to the Republic of Kyrgyzstan and earlier served in the National Security Council Secretariat. Jaideva Ranade is the president of the Center for China Analysis and Strategy and a member of India's National Security Advisory Board. He is a security and intelligence expert who has been directly involved in the formulation of Indian policy at the very highest levels, and I myself consider him to be one of the most incisive China analysts writing in the English language. Also joining us is my friend, the prolific writer on geopolitical affairs, Dr. Madhav Nalapat. He is the UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University, which appointed him as India's first professor of geopolitics in 1998. He's also the editorial director of ITV and the Sunday Guardian, which is an indispensable publication, particularly for Madhav's regular columns and trenchant analyses of India and the world. We'd like to begin with Ambassador Stobdan, who's joining us from Leh, Ladakh. Please tell us, Ambassador Sir, about the situation there and in other parts of the Indian Himalayas, and what your assessment of the crisis is now and how it may evolve in the coming months. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Eric, and good evening. It's almost dark here now. Thank you again for calling me. This is the second time that I'm talking to you through webinar. Well, I'm sure our colleagues in Delhi would have a bigger picture. I'm sitting right in the conflict area. My range is very small here. I don't get to see a lot of things, what's happening outside Ladakh, because the internet connection is very weak here. And secondly, the television is sometimes there is a power, there is no electricity, so there's a lot of difficulties in communicating. So one only gets to know through people coming from that side in the eastern Ladakh, which is about 120, 130 kilometers from here by road to the border right now. Well, I think suddenly in the last 1 week now, tension has escalated, and also there is a huge build-up now. There has been a period of lull, say from mid-July to 30th of August, to the August end. But now it looks like that this period of lull was more about preparations, maybe from both sides. I don't know whether the Chinese may have been prepared before. But there have been a lot of activities I do see here, even in the air, in the sky, everywhere. I think roads have been blocked only for military. The road has been used from Kashmir. These days, again, it's been reopened, but I don't know when it is going to be shut. But the ground situation has suddenly changed on the 30th or 29th, 30th evening. And the battlefield has now shifted from north of Pangong to the southern bank of Pangong. Not that the northern bank, where the finger area is there, has subsided, but the southern part of the lake is far more vulnerable. Because northern bank is moving towards the Aksai Chin and the entire plateau, but the southern is connected to the Indus Valley. So therefore, I think the Chinese were trying to push from the southern side, the old Chuchul or the Spangur Gap area, which is quite sensitive from our point of view. And certainly they have emerged from there. And as of today, I mean, just 1 hour before, I hear there are more than 1,000 armored tanks have been deployed by the Chinese right there. And on the 29th, we have a small post on the hill called Purtukla that we lost some time ago, but we were able to retake it. Not only Purtukla, but also some other ridge lines in that area, in the Chichul and Moldo area, where we have this small lake called Spangur Lake. You must have heard about that incident on the 30th. So it's been quite a, interesting change that has happened, and we have been quite upbeat about the entire thing. But last night again, situation has altered again in a very different way. Although situation holds as of now, but anytime this can now flare up. Anytime, even tonight or tomorrow, that kind of a critical situation. Uh, what we hear is that on the 30th, there have been 2 casualties on the Chinese side, and something like 40 plus PLA soldiers have been captured by us. Now, there are no confirmation, but this is what rumors are in the market. So then there have been some talks which has failed. It's a stalemate right now. But what is really important is, from my point of view, is the Moscow talk between the 2 defense ministers, where the Chinese have taken a very, suddenly they have taken a very hard position that, not an inch of territory can be given to India. Now, that was not the phrase which the Chinese used to use before. That's the phrase normally we use. Our politicians say borders are not negotiable, not an inch of territory would be given, things like that. But the Chinese usual language used to be, okay, we claim a lot of things, but we are flexible to negotiate with you, things like that. But now it seems like that the Moscow meeting, they have taken a very strong position that nothing can be given to the Indian side. So this is a new kind of a situation, which means that both sides have a very decisive position that we cannot have any scope for even negotiation. That's a situation which has erupted in the last 1 week, and which is, again, it's quite a worrisome. Now, as of today, as I told you, there are 2 small hillocks called Riking La and the Rizang La. Now, these 2 passes are so important for us. Once we give up that, then the entire access to southern and the southeastern part of Ladakh will be cut off. This is what the Chinese strategies seem to be, to cut us off from Pangong to, say, Anle, to Kuyul, to Demchok. That area, they just want to cut us off from there. And this built up has now again started, and then it's very difficult now to diffuse. And I don't see there will be a disengagement for now. what I see here is that even if there is a negotiation, then it is going to be uh, there's not going to be a very explicit settlement of the thing. We are going back to the old position of, temporarily calling for a ceasefire, but then looking for some kind of an exit strategy from both sides. I don't know how that is going to be achieved. Right now, I don't see even that possibility. People are waiting for the next talk, which is day after tomorrow, between the two foreign ministers. And it seems that yesterday's event is to build up a pressure on us so that we come to terms with the Chinese day after tomorrow in Moscow. But then again, it's just a matter of speculation. We really don't know. Um, uh, Practically, it will remain unresolved, and I don't know, some negotiation, political negotiation somewhere taking place. I have no idea what's happening. But what it seems right now, even in Ladakh, is that a lot of emotions are now building up. Once again, I don't see a rational kind of a decision is going to be taking place. Since yesterday, there have been funeral of a Tibetan boy who has been killed on the 30th. People are going hysterical now. Uh, I don't know what's happening in Delhi and rest of the country, but here again, that sense of nationalism has now gone up. A lot of popular sentiment, and then when we watch the television from Delhi, it's again been fueled by a lot of sentiment, and that is quite again a scary. That doesn't mean that can't be discounted. The Chinese are not arrogant, but the partly again, this hysterical period at the border, along the border, is quite scary. Some people are worried, but most people are simply, becoming too much sentimental. And I believe that, of course, we should not be looking like a very meek power, but I think we should have an open mind to express our strategic communication. If that is broken, then I think things could be very, very complicated. I do not see here right now that the disruption is so bad. There appears to be some kind of an artificially built up tension in the post COVID, but that can be managed. That depends on the diplomatic skills. That's the situation right now at the local level. Now, way ahead, I really don't see that solution could be immediately possible. There are several boundary lines. We have some boundary perception. The Chinese have a boundary perception line, but none of this seem to be coming to a sort of a understanding anywhere. Uh, what I discovered here that we have a map, the map of Ladakh, which is somewhere in the 17th, 18th century, which actually seem to be the original one. There are British maps, there are other kind of maps. There are maps which was drawn after 62 or before 62. Those maps are there. Everybody knows about that map. What I gathered here is there is a local map which corresponds to one of the British maps of the McCarthy-MacDonald line of 1899 of dividing Aksai Chin between north and south. It's not east-west, it is north-south. We have a small range called Laksang range. Laksang is very popular in Ladakh because beyond Laksang, none of our people went into Aksai Chin. We remain south of Laksang because south of Laksang we have this salt plain called Lingzi Thang, where we used to go there to collect salt. We never had sea salt. We had the lake salt coming from Lingzi Thang, and that appeared to be the outer boundaries of Ladakh. Now, Chinese have never rejected that line of 1899 of McCarthy McDonald line, but I don't see too much discussion around that. Um, for academics, I think there has to be some kind of a discussion on this McCarthy line or McDonald line. Uh, Appears to be a reasonably quite okay, which is far beyond what is now or the post 1962 line that we hold today. There seem to be no settlement now on that 62 boundary. Right now, the LAC has undergone a lot of changes. A lot of confusion has been created in the last 40, 50 years. So I think we need to go back to some of the old map, which is again, it's a huge task and it cannot be done unilaterally. Both sides have to engage in this. And my last point here is that after 30th of August, rules of the game has now changed. What used to be a conflict for line of actual control, which is a boundary related issue, 30th August, when our fellow countryman Tenzing Ngima has martyred now on the 30th at Rizangla, not Rizangla, Rinchala, this has completely changed the dynamics now here. I do not see the coming conflict is going to be about border. The coming conflict is going to be about Tibet. And that's quite interesting, which means that we are moving away from the conventional type of conflict to an irregular, proxy kind of a geopolitical game that we saw in Kashmir with Pakistan. Now, the game here now is that maybe by intention or not by intention, we opened the Tibet card by using this force, because this was a secret organization which was kept secret for last 60 years, but suddenly now this has come into the international limelight, which means that I do not see the Chinese are going to keep quiet about it. And Chinese are going to have a counter strategy, which means that my place is now becoming a battle zone for a geopolitical thing. And I also see a lot of write-ups coming from the other side that the Chinese might be trying to exploit a historical rift between Tibet and Ladakh. That's quite a possibility. How they are going to motivate the Tibetan troops on the other side against, we have this kind of a problem for a very long time, from maybe 400, 500 years old conflict. From this side, we do not have. Our troops are there, but this time, of course, the Tibetan troops have been used. And I really don't know when the Tibetans are now going on the front, and there's going to be a Tibetans on the other side also, which PLA is going to deploy more and more Tibetan troops on the other side. So things are going to become a little bit more complicated. I see geopolitically complicated. That is going to affect the entire Himalayas. Now, yesterday again, the Chinese side has opened, or at least make a statement again on Arunachal Pradesh, that we have never recognized Arunachal to be part of India. Now, they are trying to shift the conflict from the boundary to a larger, ethnic, territorial, some other kind of issues. This is a new challenge, and I really don't know how this is going to unfold now. Because I see some write-ups that there has been 2 articles in the last 2 days that how China could, in a same manner, invoke the history of Nari. Now, Nari, they claim that Ladakh was part of the Tibetan dynasty, and Tibet was part of the Yuan dynasty, then the Ming dynasty, and the Qing dynasty. That connection is now trying to be rebuilt. What I'm trying to say is that they want to have an administrative setup where they would cover Ladakh also part of that, just as India has said, okay, Gilgit-Baltistan is part of India, or Aksai Chin is part of India. I would see, at least at the academic level, they are now started writing that Ladakh is part of, Ngari Kingdom, which is on the other side. Obviously, there was a kingdom called Guge. We all had a split from Guge Kingdom, which is in Western Tibet, which is quite ancient now, almost 1,000 years old history. But it's a fact that historically we were part of the Tibetan kingdom. But what the Chinese academics seem to be now trying to write, most of them are in Chinese, but I get them translated. It never used to appear like that. Now people are writing such things, and then this is again a new challenge for those analysts who are trying to study here the issues and the history and the ethnicity and the religion and all that. Plenty of new areas to study, and I'm mostly engaged in this kind of a thing, how this can be countered with our own history. But obviously, a lot more people need to be engaged in this. Thank you very much, and we'll come on Q&A before.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to coming back in a short bit. Dr. Renata, you and I have spoken before about the way in which the CCP under Xi Jinping has been ratcheting up and manufacturing all manner of international crises with a lot of its neighbors, including with India. I wanted to ask you, what do you think Beijing's intentions are with respect to India and also in Ladakh today and in other parts of the Himalayas?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you for inviting me today. If I may say, along with the other distinguished panelists, I think we hopefully will head for a very informed discussion. But let me set out a few points here. Firstly, I think after Xi Jinping took over in November 2012, we are seeing a new aggressive China. A new aggressive, when I say, of course, in all factors, in all areas, the initial moves were made by Hu Jintao, but it is Xi Jinping who's really taken it forward. As far as India is concerned, the first manifestation of that, if I may use a favorite Chinese word, was when the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang was visiting India for the first time as Premier, which was in May 2013. And at that time, April 2013, at that time, there was an intrusion that took place here, which lasted a long time. And finally, it was sorted out just days before Li Keqiang's arrival. But within 2 weeks of that issue being resolved, there was a very lengthy article in the Zhongguo Qingnian Pao, which is the China Youth Daily, which incidentally has a higher circulation than the People's Daily, and which spelt out how Ladakh was actually Chinese territory. And it, I would say, sought to legitimize the claim. So this was just something that they started doing. Then we had Xi Jinping talk about the China dream, where the third part was, of course, the rejuvenation of the great Chinese nation, as they call it, which involves the recovery of the territories that they claimed were lost through the imposition of unequal treaties. And that, as far as India is concerned, included J&K, Arunachal Pradesh, bits from the central sector of Himachal, Sikkim, etc. So for us, the impact was direct, and we noticed the Chinese push, shall I say, accelerating or increasing. As far as this particular development is concerned, which started in May, on 5th of May to be precise, I understand, in fact, my reading is that the manner in which the Chinese came on our borders, the massive force with which they came, and the fact that they deployed themselves across almost 1,100 kilometers of the line of actual control at multiple points, indicated to me very clearly that they have come with an agenda. It was not just for an intrusion. Normally, when they come in small packets, commit an intrusion, maybe try and sit there or not. But this time, it was something larger. And along with this, when they came, they began building up reserve force strengths. This indicates 2 or 3 things very clearly. One, as I said, they have come with a larger agenda. Secondly, that since forces were pulled in from different theater commands, that means it has been cleared at the very highest level. which means Xi Jinping. And let's not forget, he's also assumed the mantle of the Commander-in-Chief of the Joint Operations Command in April 2016. So my suspicion is that in fact he actually initiated the planning for this particular action, and this started sometime around 2018, 2019. I'm not saying that they had decided that this is exactly what they're going to do, but they had started preparations, and that was evident from the increased number of exercises, military exercises that were being conducted on the Tibetan plateau. So there were indicators like this which came about. And then I think they did not anticipate the rapidity with which the Indian counter build-up took place. I think our forces were also massed, and today, I think as Ambassador Stobdan rightly pointed out, there are a large number of forces, an estimated 40,000 on each side, which is a huge number, and more coming in as reserves. So this is a large deployment that is taking place, but what it means is that it frustrates China's larger agenda, whatever it had planned here. My suspicion is, and here I'm speculating a little bit, and going a bit by logic, which doesn't necessarily make sense, but my suspicion is that when the Chinese came, they decided to secure their strategic and financial investments in the wider Ladakh area, which is Aksai Chin, Gilgit, Baltistan, and the CPEC, POK. So for which they would have to cut off our access to Siachen and the Aksai Chin, and which means a deep thrust. Now, obviously, I don't think that is possible now unless they're going to go in for a major conflict. I somehow suspect that they probably are going to fight shy of that, or they don't have the stomach for it. Let us wait and see what happens. But things are at the moment at a razor's edge. We have also taken some, shall I say, preemptive or precautionary measures, and on the night of 29th, 30th, we captured 10 heights, or rather we retook 10 heights where we were not present. And that is where this latest incident occurred on the 7th of September, 6th, 7th night, when the Chinese came and they fired in the air to scare us off. But when we fired back again in the air, they went back. And tensions have ratcheted up considerably after that. But this deployment did take place, and the casualty, I think I must touch on it, the casualty, the death of a Special Frontier Force officer is, I think, a major point. It's major not because of his death. I mean, that's very sad, but it's major because it was disclosed that that unit was involved, and at an official level, there was recognition of the fact that he had participated when the General Secretary of the BJP, or one of the General Secretaries, was present at the funeral ceremonies in Leh. So that was a recognition, and as Ambassador Stobdan rightly pointed out, that it does point to Tibet now having willy-nilly got involved. But I think there is another sub-agenda here, which is that it could also be sending out a message to Tibetans inside Tibet, where I think the Chinese leadership are quite nervous about the situation there. We have just seen 4 Politburo Standing Committee members visit Tibet over the last couple of months. The Panchen Lama has been there now for over a month, for almost 2 months, which has not happened in the past. And the new Tibet Work Conference that was recently held, the 7th, has come out with very tough proposals for Tibet on security, on adapting Tibetan Buddhism to socialism with Chinese characteristics, on making monks and nuns patriotic, etc. So I think this is all, we have to read it from that perspective. Whether the Chinese can figure out a counter is another. What has been the development after the Galwan incident and these incidents? The vulnerable points, as again was pointed out, around Spangur Gap, which is just across the Chushul airstrip, old Chushul airstrip, that is an ideal ground for tank warfare also. But there, both sides have now deployed armored regiments and tanks. So I think there is a kind of a stalemate there. But what I was trying to get at is the meetings that have that have been held since then in Moscow. The meeting between the two defense ministers. I think most people who look at China know that the defense minister in China has no real clout. He basically looks after the administration and budgetary matters after the budget has been allocated. So he's there. He's a member of the military commission, but he's also, everyone knows, he's on his way out. So whereas on the other hand, our defense minister who went there, Mr. Rajnath Singh, ranks second in the BJP, and the defense minister in India has certainly a more robust role. So that was the meeting. I think the message there was that the Chinese did not set much store by the meeting itself, and he came with a prepared script. Now, the next scheduled meeting, or anticipated meeting to be correct, is the one between Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, and our foreign minister, Jaishankar, which I think is either on the 9th or the 10th. And there again, Wang Yi and the foreign ministry for that matter don't really have any clout on the entire issue. On matters concerning the border, sovereignty and territorial issues, the foreign ministry is third or fourth in the hierarchy for discussions. So, and here again, whatever is discussed, either Wang Yi will come with the prepared text, or it will be transmitted up through Yang Jiechi to Xi Jinping, and then a decision will be taken. But what is relevant here is what I mentioned at the outset, that they have come with a larger agenda, which to my mind is very clear that Xi Jinping is the one who has approved the plans. And today, I think he finds himself in a difficult position for two reasons. One, of course, that we have also built up all along the border, 4,057 kilometers of it. And we have indicated very clearly that we are not going to step back come what may. So, and this has been conveyed not only on the ground, but also by the defense ministers and during the talks. The second is the fact that Xi Jinping is under fire at home. I mean, he's being criticized. And just in the last 2 months, there have been at least 6 massive nationwide ideological campaigns which have started, which are going to result in purges. The security apparatus, which had so far escaped a massive purge, that has now been subjected to the same thing, and all by Xi Jinping's henchmen. So he is trying to hem himself in. From what I've heard from, if I may use a bit of jargon, reliable friends from Shanghai and Beijing, is that security for Xi Jinping has been beefed up. Now, he himself is under fire, which means that even if Xi Jinping is willing or looking at a way to exit from here, I think which is relevant, how does he do it? That is going to be the big question. Because inside China, the people, his detractors, will hold that against him. The nationalism that he has pumped into the people will go against him. So it is a difficult situation for Xi Jinping. And here I cannot help but say that as the negotiators start discussing it and looking for probably a face-saving way out, I only hope that we on our part are not too quick to save Xi Jinping's face, because what has happened is that he has actually used deception and deceit to mask the troops on our borders, and again repeated that at Galwan. So I'll stop here. I'm willing for Q&A, whatever there is. But I thought I'll just spell this out to give you an overview of what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madhav, Dr. Nalapat, I wanted to ask you, among other things, what you felt Moscow's play in all of this is. But before we get to that, Let's talk about Indian domestic politics. How has the crisis affected the public's perception of China? And how do you think that's going to affect Indian policy going forward?
Well, I'd like to say that I think the perception of China, I think that was a hard knock of a dose of realism, what took place at the border in May and what has taken place subsequently. The reality is that there have been many individuals in India who believe that China would go this far and no further, a little incrementally, and they don't really calculate, when you move incrementally, still you move ahead on an agenda. And if the other side is doing that, it's at your expense. I mean, I found it very illuminating to go back to the 1962 conflict. Right from 1947 to 1962, it was very clear, I mean, from 49, if I may say so, 50, 51, when Chairman Mao took control of the system there, it was very clear what China was intending to do in Aksai Chin and across the Himalayan frontier. From that time onwards, it was very clear that Chinese had decided there is one tiger on the mountain, and that is China. So India, we may be willing to give you the role of a leopard. We may be willing, or maybe not even that, but you're no tiger. So don't even try to be one. I mean, there were multiple intrusions during that time, but there was a spirit of denial right through, almost in a few days before the conflict, and even almost on the eve of the conflict. Most of the decision makers in Delhi were in complete denial that the Chinese would ever attack in force, and lo and behold, that's what they did. So this time, of course, has been different, as Jaydev has pointed out, as Ambassador Stockton has pointed out. So I think the good news is that this has come out of the closet. The reality that China is basically telling India, you know your place. And your place essentially is that we are the engine, we will pull everybody, and you will go in the direction that we want you to go. So that is very, very, and if you don't accept that, well, you're going to get into a serious trouble. Actually the sign should have been fairly obvious. The CPEC should have been a wake-up call. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Now, it passes through Kashmir, which is Indian territory, and it's called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. I mean, there's not even the pretense of calling that part that passes through Kashmir the CKEC. You needn't call it the CI, Economic Corridor, India, because, okay, you say it's disputed. The China-Kashmir Economic Corridor. No, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. I mean, the Chinese actually, sometimes they pretend to act off the cuff, but they never do that. They basically act after a tremendous amount of reflection. So essentially, this was a signal that Kashmir belongs to Pakistan. All that I'm seeing today is, I think, part of a strategy of, one, ensuring that their satellite, which is the Pakistan Army, I mean, there's the difference between the Pakistan people, the so-called government of Pakistan, and the Pakistan Army, which essentially is running Pakistan. The alliance is between the PLA and GHQ Rawalpindi, the Pakistan Army. As I see it, the intention is very clear, and that is to give the Pakistan Army what it has been searching for all these years, when it is losing legitimacy, when it is losing popularity, and frankly losing self-respect, even among its own people, and that is to get control of the Kashmir, of large tracts of Kashmir from India. That Ladakh, of course, so what they will do, the Pakistanis have already handed over territory to China. They've explicitly handed it over, and implicitly they've handed a lot of Pakistan territory over to China. Implicitly, China today controls a huge area of territory throughout the entire length and breadth of Pakistan, besides practically the entirety of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. It was unfortunate that our troops stopped before they liberated that whole area, because it is very crucial for geopolitical, in Central Asia, in Afghanistan, going back to Iran, that belongs to India, a moderate power. and not to Pakistan, which has unfortunately got a neo-Wahhabi army, and an army which is very proud of having jihad as its motto. So the second thing is, as I see it, they are looking at controlling the entire Himalayan ridgeline. Essentially, what they're doing in Nepal is part of that process. In my view, they're looking at control over Bhutan. I mean, whether it is explicit or implicit, I mean, the Pakistan model is part explicit, part implicit. But they're looking at Bhutan. They're looking at recapturing, in their words, Sikkim, which is very much a part of India and which is run by the Indian government. Doklam and other issues, I think, show that in relief. They're also looking at Arunachal Pradesh. So they're looking at the entire Himalayan massif as belonging to them, and what that does to India, make it completely dependent on its water, on China, and therefore almost impossible, frankly, to become a hostile power. In the sense, if you're a hostile power, you can squeeze India very badly by simply, ensuring a problem in water. Personally, Eric, I mean, if you've been reading my writings for a long time, I've been talking about the horrible mistakes that we have made. Tibet, for example, large numbers of water sources were handed over. The Tibetan plateau was handed over. But I mean, I'm not sure exactly how much help we would have got from the United States or from Britain. And from what I'm hearing, possibly not very much. I don't know. But in any case, the loss of POK was a huge strategic upset for India. And frankly, the absolute absence of control over any part of Tibet was also a huge negative for India. Now, why I'm saying this, the Chinese, by their actions, have become fairly explicit about what they want. If you take them at what they say, and they're extremely polite people, you take them at what they say to you, or what they say in public, or what they say in the English language publications, or in the Chinese language newspapers that they know are read mostly by foreigners, well, that's a different matter. But if you look at the publications, there are tiny little publications and in little provinces or little towns and cities, basically a few thousand copies each. Well, they're a little more explicit about what they want. And again, I would say, Eric, essentially they want to basically teach us a lesson, beat us to the ground, for the simple reason that their plan of dominating the Indo-Pacific requires a compliant India. In their words, a neutral India. We were neutral, if you remember, during the Cold War days, and I think part of the reason was the very eager embrace that the United States, John Foster Dulles, had to the Pakistan army. I mean, frankly, your current embrace to the Taliban is equally inexplicable to people like me, who are extremely, if I may say so, sympathetic to America and to its geopolitical objectives, and frankly to the great American people. But having said that, their target is the United States of America. And they know that if India and America do come together in an alliance, you can call it a formal alliance, informal alliance, there's no need to be a lawyer about it. If you're a military man and not a lawyer, you're not going to care what it's called. If you're a lawyer, you'll only care what it's called without worrying about what it is. I mean, Bill Clinton signed a deal, this non-proliferation treaty, which according to the law of the treaty stretches into eternity. Now that is an extremely theological thing. So obviously the spiritual aspect of the Bill Clinton's lawyers came into play, that something is supposed to stretch into eternity. I can point out multiple instances of lawyers drafting treaties. Look, I'm not looking at a lawyer's treaty. I'm looking at a general's treaty. I'm looking at a common sense treaty, frankly, between the United States and India. Why China is doing this to India is very simple. It wants to humiliate India, destroy its self-confidence, and above all, destroy the confidence of the United States that this country is worth having as a partner. Because, may I point out, India is not Japan. India is not Germany. India is not France. India is not the United Kingdom. It's a little bit bigger and, in our view, a little more consequential than all this. Personally, what I'm looking at is a repeat of the 1980s. You had a very cozy arrangement with China. both sides used to abuse each other off and on. And both sides used to work silently to ensure that the enemy of both was dealt with. And I think that went on extremely well. China has never been a treaty ally of the United States, but you know what has happened. I mean, the kind of operations that China has helped the United States, the kind of help the United States has given China is way beyond even that which the United States has given many treaty allies, quite frankly. So that kind of an alliance. So I have seen this, frankly, as Prime Minister Modi's Deng Xiaoping moment. That look, you have supply chain delinking from China. So far as the US is concerned, well, Donald Trump wants to build everything in America. If he wants to have American companies dominating commerce and beating the Sino-Russian alliances alternatives, including in many parts of the world like Southeast Asia and the Gulf, well, he better ask these companies to set up some of the production facilities in India. Number one. Two, if you're looking at beating China in artificial intelligence, and I can tell you the Chinese have been very focused on beating you in that for many years. I mean, in 2017, I met some people who I think are, fairly consequential in China, and we had a nice little dinner, and I was talking about this trade, tension that's come up, and I think, I think it was somebody at the table. I mean, my wife and I were the two Indians at the table. Somebody at the table talked in terms of, well, when the election comes, the congressional election, Trump will cool down. That there was a glare from the top guy at the table on the Chinese side. And subsequently, in my hotel, I was presented with a book just before I left. And that book was Protracted War by Mao Zedong on the Japanese war. Look, the Chinese are very subtle people. What I was told explicitly by the handover of that book to me 1 hour before I was leaving for the airport was, look, don't be under any illusion. We are in a protracted war with the United States. And when I read the book, I saw two lessons. Mao says, eliminate those who believe we can win easily. Those who say we can win easily, throw them out. And two, eliminate those who think we can lose and we are ever going to lose. So look, I mean, the Chinese have been very clear. I'm very happy to see that judging by Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Esper, your national, security advisor, I think the folks in Washington also are very clear. You are at war. I think you folks are a little clearer about being at war than possibly we are. I mean, I think, I would like to say that the Moscow meeting that took place, I knew it'll amount to nothing. It'll be a sermon in Moscow. And the meeting is going to take place. Ambassador Foreign Minister Jaishankar and Foreign Minister Wang Yi will also be an exercise in futility. But the reality of the situation is that the facts on the ground are we are at war. And in China, war doesn't mean necessarily bullets or artillery or bombs or helicopters. In fact, they want to avoid all that. It means dominating the enemy, dominating their mind space, making them do what they want you to do. And that war is on with China. The way, for example, they've been siphoning off metadata from the Indian population through various apps, through funding Indian startups, through Huawei and other Chinese telecom products, multiple ways I'm not going to go in here, that they've been at war with us. Today, it's becoming very difficult. India is, of course, as you know, the land of peace. I mean, in your case, Abraham Lincoln was a peaceful president who decided he had to go to war. In our case, Mahatma Gandhi was such a saint, he advised the British to allow Hitler to send his soldiers into their homes. And he said, it doesn't matter. I mean, he advised, us to basically forget about, tackling Pakistan in any other way. Don't worry about it. So that is the extreme saintliness of his. But I can only say, I mean, that kind of an approach seems to be finding less and less takers. I mean, there was a perception that, I was being a little overeager on trying to form an alliance with the United States. I think if you go back to my writings, you'll see more than 20 years ago, I talked of an Asian NATO. Around the same time, I talked of the necessity of constraining China. Jaidev Randev has been talking about this kind of situation for quite some time. I am glad to say that in the town that I am here, that is our version of the Beltway, the Lutyens zone, less and less people are openly mocking us. And frankly, the mocking has gone down to almost zero. And the more and more people are believing that what we say may be actually true. So the point is, Eric, my last point. This means the Americans have to decide on India as a unique kind of ally. One, if you want primacy on the Indo-Pacific, and so do we, it is a question of a partnership getting primacy on the Indo-Pacific over the Sino-Russian alliance. Well, in that case, there are certain things in my view. One, of course, forget about India being in a situation by which we just reflexively do whatever you want us to do, including the mistakes you're making, which include, Iran, for example. If you want to take care of the Taliban and prevent them from dominating Afghanistan, the help of Iran, overt or covert, is essential. You cannot do without it. And in our case also, we don't want networks of a particular kind to be active in India. We love the Israelis. The Israelis love us. A few days ago, I had, along with the AJC, an India-Israel-US trilateral. And it's been a privilege to have anything with the Jewish community, because along with Indic culture, Jewish culture has survived over thousands and thousands of years. And it has survived, if I may say so, even worse problems than we have faced in India, much worse problems. It's an amazing thing. It's a humbling thing to frankly have a discussion with them. But I'd only like to say that so far as Iran is concerned, we need Iran, Iran needs us. Our foreign minister is going there tomorrow. I think our defense minister has already been there. I think there's no point in chewing your fingernails about it. It will be finally important for you also to have somebody who's close to Iran and not have Iran completely swallowed up by the Chinese. Secondly, supply chains. So you use India as a production base. And three, keep the flow going of the kind of munitions and material that are needed to give the Chinese what they don't want, which is a hot war. This is an army that has not fought since 1979. Our soldiers have not stopped fighting for a single week since 1947. That has made a lot of difference in the Galwan Valley. As you correctly said, my initial figure given to me was 60. It hasn't changed very much of Chinese casualties. No wonder they're keeping silent about it. And if I may say so, whatever happened a few days ago, the reality is, Eric, that if we are properly supplied with the United States and we have the support of the United States, I can assure you that, as Winston Churchill says, give us the tools and we'll finish that job. And that job includes a significant piece of territory. I'm not going to go further than that, except to say that in our Prime Minister, we also have a very far-thinking leader. We also have a leader who doesn't take decisions lightly. And I think he would have seen the fact that President Xi left him at Mamallapuram and went straight on to Kathmandu. And he would have listened to what President Xi was saying in Kathmandu. And I don't really know the Prime Minister at all. I met him only a few times. I don't think he'll remember my face or even my name. But this is a guy who doesn't forget. And for a lot of people in Delhi, it was a wake-up call when Xi Jinping didn't go back to Beijing from Mamallapuram, this great cozy summit, the second Wuhan with Prime Minister Modi, but went on to Nepal, a country which we believe is very much a friendly neighbor and very much part of our friendly bloc of countries, and made some comments there which are not very friendly. And more importantly, when you watch and see all across South Asia, how the Pakistanis are sitting on the shoulders of the Chinese, and Chinese have become a force multiplier in Pakistan terror, in Pakistan sabotage, and in Pakistan operations against India, Europe, United States. If you look at any of the activities in the United States, you will find a Pakistan footprint somewhere there. So I only want to say that, look, give us the tools and we'll finish the job. And the job is essentially ensuring that the entire Himalayan massif comes in the control of the democracies, that the entirety of the Indo-Pacific comes under the primacy of the democracies. And this happens in such a way that it becomes, at least for the next few generations, it becomes a fact of life. India and the United States can do this together. United States can't do it alone. India cannot do it alone, which is why I was talking years ago about an alliance. And I think, Eric, the situation will finally lead to this alliance coming, hopefully not before the Chinese take us out one by one by one by one. That is the various powers in Asia, and eventually leave the United States alone with possibly Japan and a mutilated Australia to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Stobden, and also Dr. Ranade, I wanted to ask the two of you just to elaborate a bit more on Dr. Nalapat's observations about the role of Ladakh in the PRC's continental strategy, and what you think the PRC, what its larger Eurasian agenda is in its outreach not only into Pakistan, but also into Iran, into Central Asia and elsewhere, and how is that affecting India's security? Ambassador Stobden, we can start with you, sir.
Well, I think you are quite right because they have been shifting their goals in the Eurasian politics every century. In the 19th century, they were north of the Kunlun range. And in the 20th century, they came to the Karakoram range. And in 21st century, they want to come into Ladakh range. Now, this is not just a military plan, but also in terms of discourse and the narrative they set in. What I fear now it's been more than 3-4 months now, this debate which is going on about Ladakh. To me, it looks like that Ladakh has become a new normal. Earlier, we only talked about Taiwan issue, the Hong Kong issue, Xinjiang issue, and the Tibet issue. Now we have got a new agenda called Ladakh on the table, and everybody got played into this game of the Chinese led, and I myself is contributing to that debate. In a way, we haven't found a solution to blunt the Chinese design. And one way is to, of course, the military reaction is one way, but then this whole discourse itself is becoming at this particular moment, I believe, million times Ladakh must be going on this earth. So even a child would now start knowing. The other day I was trying to say, look, my economy is gone. I don't get my salaries for last 2 months. What should I do? They're saying that no, now you start selling Ladakh salt. Ladakh is so popular in the world that a Depsang salt or Lingzi Thang salt would be a brand in the world to sell it, because it's a kind of a special kind of a salt which everybody would like to consume. So people are looking from commercial angle, people are looking from strategic angle, people are looking from all kind of angles. So Ladakh has become very, 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 very fashionable thing now. So I don't know what is the Chinese design in making Ladakh an issue. That's why I'm saying it is being backed up by other kind of thing. All said and done, I agree with Professor Nalapat of the military dimension, the United States dimension, the power dimension of it. But essentially, the Chinese are not only power-centric nation, it's a historical-centric nation. And they think that historically they have some argument when it comes to Ladakh also. So now problem is that, the Chinese, that's why I said I lived in Mongolia, Manchuria, and all these places. To me, I do not really separate too much between the Tibetan and the Mongols and the Chinese. They are having some kind of a problem. It's like between brothers and all. But essentially, they have been together for centuries, living together. And there are geographical differences and all kind of a thing. But when a Mongol goes to China, the Tibetan goes to China, he feels much more comfortable with the Chinese. There are political issues, obviously. So I think when they look at the Himalayas, what are they trying to convey the message? It's saying, look, these are part of Tibet. Now, frankly speaking, I'm a part of Tibet. My name is itself is a Tibetan name. So they are quite confident about what they are talking about. So if you say that, look, you've been ruled by Sikhs and the British and the Kashmiris and all that thing, that is another level of understanding. What they are trying to do is little going deeper into it. That's why they are very confident. Now, how do you react militarily to that kind of a situation? That's a different issue. Power really certainly plays a role. But Chinese, whether it is South China Sea, whether it is in Siberia, whether it is in Balkhash Lake in Kazakhstan or in the Himalayas, they say it's a spread of Manchu world. And who are these instruments of the Manchu world? There were the Manchus themselves, there were the Mongol themselves, there were the Tibetan themselves. What is my relationship with Lhasa? My relationship with Lhasa is that I pray my Lama. And the Lamas were praying, giving tribute to the Manchu Empire. So this is where the Chinese perception is. Now, to me, I give more emphasis on the history to understand the Chinese mind. But I do not see here in this country, they go for the quick solution, but they do not go into and in the process, you get played into the Chinese game. Unless you understand the differentiations, whether it is geographical, cultural, historical differentiation, everything is not China, 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 China. Everything is not Tibet, 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 Tibet. Everything has a very, very nuanced kind of a relationship. And the Chinese tend to play on those nuances, those relationships, which is hard to figure out. My understanding is more than me, it was the British who understood these nuances, not me. Even my colleague in the Indian establishment really do not understand too many things about this Oriental, complicated, unscrupulous kind of a history. This is where we get, almost, I won't say defeated, but we always have limitation in understanding the Chinese mind. In the Himalaya, the terrain itself, I'm not saying the geographical terrain, the whole landscape of the Himalaya is so complicated. My colleagues in the army calls me, what is this meaning in, this is a Tibetan name, but I would like to know you, what is the meaning of this word? Now, an Indian army has to rely on me to understand the meaning of that place. The other side is very familiar. He says, look, the Tibetans are there, they tell you where to go. My nomads and my yaks go here and there. So it's not that the Chinese threat perception is not there. Everybody has fear about Chinese dominance. The whole Chinese supremacy is very, very scary. But at times, my problem is that my own inadequacies, my own inability to understand that becomes my problem. Consistency in policy, thinking. While today this government is quite active in all these things, but I'm not sure down the line the same kind of a thinking will remain. So over the years, 70 years, we overlooked China. And nobody else is losing, I'm losing. My territory is gone. More than India, it is my Stobden's territory. Stobden, I have land in Demchok, but that land is going. And I'm more worried about it. But the problem is that we don't have a say in the whole system. I'm sure there is a Ladakhi solution to the problem also. If you ask me how to diffuse the situation in Eastern Ladakh, I will spend only 60 rupees, which is $1. Because I know the Chinese mind, how to make him a fool out of himself. But then I have, my knowledge cannot be understood or even well received by others, that as a Ladakhi, how will you deal with the Chinese or the Tibetan? I mean, to me, there is no China. To me, there are only Tibetans are there. But how to deal with the Tibetans, I know better than anybody else. But then there are no such approach pursued, that everybody looks for some other kind of a solution, which I really don't know where that solution is going to come from. I was in Bhutan a couple of years ago. They have the similar kind of a situation what we see in Eastern Ladakh. I asked the Bhutanese, how do you deal with the Chinese here? You have a long border with China. We said, look, in the western side of Bhutanese border, we do have some Indian troops. So we, along with Indian troops, we patrol and all this thing. But in the north, in the east, we have no Indian troops. We have to patrol ourselves, the Royal Bhutanese Army. Then I said, how do you manage with the PLA? Well, I spent few bottle of vodka. I spent a few kilogram of yak meat and some butter. And we exchange gift. And the Chinese are happy. They're corrupt people. They would like to be corrupted. And they go back. So this is how I manage my border. But of course, they are strong people. And we don't have the ability to counter China. So we have adopted other methodologies, the psychological methodologies, the religious methodologies, the gift practices, the cultural methodologies. So I think we need to learn a lot. Dealing with China is quite difficult, and I don't see it's going to be just a military defense. It has to be a human, cultural, all kind of a asymmetric kind of a situation. And therefore, I think capability has to be built up. 60 years we've been talking, but finally, once this tension is diffused, and then everybody will go back to their normal life, and then we forget about China for once again. That my fear is therefore is this: I fear my own incapabilities, deficiencies, rather than China threat is known for 5,000 years. The Chinese are aggressive; they cannot be trusted at all. So that's my point. And the Himalaya is no different. Everywhere it's like same kind of a situation.
Yeah, thank you, sir. For everybody here in the U.S. that has asked me, I've tended to refer them to your excellent book, The Great Game in the Himalayas, which is a extremely useful and very incisive primer on the future. Thank you. Jay, it's something of a paradox that the Marxist-Leninist party that controls China, that its operative strategic vision is essentially a derivative of the Manchus. But I was curious, in the short amount of time that we have left, if you could say something a bit more about how you think some of the quarrels at the very top of the party in Beijing may unfold. You had mentioned that Xi Jinping is quite, as you see it, quite unpopular with significant cohorts both within the party and within China itself. But I'm also quite interested to hear your thoughts about what you think Xi Jinping's agenda is, not just in the Himalayas, but also in the South China Sea in coming years, assuming he lasts that long. Sir.
Thank you, Eric. You want me to touch on Himalaya and Ladakh, or should I just go straight into your question about Xi Jinping?
How about let's go into my question, given the time. Thank you. We'll have to reconvene this session again.
Certainly we should, in fact. But let me just say that Xi Jinping has been under criticism since, I would say, 2018 March, definitively. That was when he ignored the informal term limit set for promotion of people into the higher positions, and he abolished the term limit for the post of president. What happened then was that a large number of members of the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee sort of objected to that. Many of them have lived through, at least I would think, about 40%, 38 to 40% are people who have survived the Cultural Revolution, who've been through it, and they did not want to go back to those times. In fact, many of them said so quite explicitly, that we don't want to return to the one-man rule of Mao, because they had seen what all happened at that point in time. A large number of retired people who, of course, continue to be senior members of the Chinese Communist Party, academics, intellectuals, and others, similarly voiced their protests. And funnily enough, including a number of students. So, and what happened because of this was that the, shall I say, the pool of discontented began increasing. And I'm almost sure that this would have included people in the PLA, though one hasn't come across specific instances. But when the coronavirus hit China, this dissent came out into the open. And there were a spate of academics, intellectuals, party cadres, senior party cadres, including one member of the Supreme People's Procuratorate, who criticized Xi Jinping. Some of them did so by name, some of them did so otherwise, but the criticism was there to a large extent within the party. And you may recall that princelings, who normally lie low, don't make a public issue, even they wrote a letter to Xi Jinping saying it's time you step down. Prominent businessmen like Jack Ma and the founder of Lenovo, etc., they wrote a letter and handed it over to Li Keqiang to pass on to Xi Jinping, saying, bring in reforms. They didn't say step down, but short of that, they said everything else, including calling for the release of another princeling, Ran Chirchang, who, of course, they've arrested now, and probably he's going to be tried. So what I'm trying to say is that senior party members, intellectuals and academics, and princelings seem to have coalesced into some kind of a loose mass of criticism against Xi Jinping. And that puts Xi Jinping in a bit of a difficult position. Because what he's doing is he's unveiling a large number of ideological campaigns. He's unveiled a large number of security campaigns and tightened security. The social credit management system is another thing that he's brought in, which is going to be unveiled across China by the end of this year. So all this has increased the people's tension as well as their unhappiness with Xi Jinping. This is complicated by the downturn in the economy. In fact, I would say a rapid slide in the economy. Unemployment has gone up from about 17 to 18 million in 2019 to between 70 to 80 million this year, by April this year. And about 300 million people haven't come back to work from the rural areas. So, they're in a problem. Production, yes, many of the factories have started, but they're getting no orders. So there are no wages. And my sense is, again, which the think tanks, like the think tank of the Ministry of State Security, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and others, have warned the Politburo and Xi Jinping. In fact, they went there and presented their reports to them. As the coronavirus lifts in the United States and in Europe, there is going to be no easing up of the market situation as far as China is concerned. I think the United States will continue to close off its markets to the Chinese. Similarly, Europe has also now started. So I think, as you know, Wang Yi got a fairly cold reception this time when he went. So what I see is the Chinese export market getting shrunk. I would estimate, say, 70% of the US and European market shut off to the Chinese, which makes the Indian market even more important. And I think that's also in the back of their mind. So this is how I look at what's happening. And for Xi Jinping, he is, of course, battening down US pressure on him. He has started doing this ideological campaign, saying that the United States pressure has to be countered because they want to dismantle the Chinese Communist Party. But within the Communist Party, people understand that he is the first target. So I wouldn't be surprised if in course of time, if the pressure continues, it might reach a situation where the veterans gather around and tell Xi Jinping, look, my friend, you better step down because the party is going to be otherwise hurt. And that might happen. So I think that is, for example, I'll mention only two things. One was this proposal. It's not yet been made into a decision, but the proposal to ban all Chinese Communist Party members from getting a visa to the US. Now, almost 70% of Chinese Communist Party people who are departmental heads and above. Their kids are studying in the US. So suddenly for them, it's a fear. Secondly, a large number have parked their funds in the United States, Canada, Australia, and suddenly they become vulnerable. So that's a big threat to them. And the other is the policy that has been announced that people who are actively involved in formulation or implementation of repressive policies against people in Xinjiang and Hong Kong are going to be penalized. I mean, Carrie Lam's son has had to come back already to Hong Kong. That would have shaken them too. And I'm waiting for the shoe to fall as far as Tibet is concerned. So these things have got them very worried. And I think that is the situation that Xi Jinping is in. I can't say with any certainty when and what, but I think as time goes on, if this pressure is maintained, then his continuance beyond the next party Congress becomes even a bigger question mark.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I would hope that the shoe will fall as well on those responsible for the repression in Tibet and in China itself. But fortunately, we do have an American law, the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, which provides a legislative foundation for U.S. policy toward the CCP for years to come. And one of our challenges now is to maintain the political consensus that will continue to ratchet up the Magnitsky-style sanctions on the entities and the individuals that are responsible for the genocide that's taking place in Xinjiang. We're certainly also hoping that our allies in Europe and in Japan will continue to move in the direction of joining us on that issue, because it's the human rights issue of our age, and it also goes directly to the kind of regime that the CCP is, that it's become under Xi Jinping at least. Thank you. Madhav, can we turn to you for final comments since we're running out of time?
Yes, I'd only like to say, Eric, that the problem. I mean, we're talking about what happens if Joe Biden wins on the 3rd of November. Well, one of the problems would be that there are a lot of Atlanticists in Joe Biden's, among his advisory group. And these people, they talk about science, they talk about data, but they ignore the science and the data of the fact that Asia has become much more consequential than Europe, including to the United States in terms of the economy, in terms of trade, etc. And that today, if yesterday was the world of the Atlantic Alliance, today will have to be the world of the Indo-Pacific Alliance. And if we had an Atlantic Charter and Indo-Pacific Charter, as far as President Xi is concerned, the one thing that can really destabilize him would be a military defeat. Because Xi Jinping, in my view, has combined the ideologies of Mao Zedong in terms of control of the party, Han nationalism, Greater China, and that of Lin Biao, which is an ideology essentially based on challenging the Western countries and essentially relying on third world countries or the rest of the world, so to speak, to challenge the Western countries and isolate them. He's combined the two. So if he goes in for any kind of a military shock or defeat, whether it's on the Himalayas or whether it's in in some other theater, well, then that is going to have a very severe effect of his standing inside the party. On the other hand, if he has a significant military victory, it is going to make his position very strong. And the next year is the year of the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. It's a very important year for the party and for Xi Jinping. He needs a victory. And if he can find it by taking over the Himalayan Massif, great. If he can find it by ensuring that India loses control of huge chunks of its own territory, well, great. If he can do it by ensuring some kind of a swoop on Taiwan, great. If he can do it by establishing de facto control over South China Sea, great. But that is the Achilles heel. And that is where I'm very clear, we need an Indo-Pacific Charter on the lines of the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter prevented a war between the major powers in Europe. Today, we need an Atlantic Charter to prevent war between the major powers in Asia. We need an Indo-Pacific Charter to prevent war between the major powers in Asia.
Dr. Nalapat, that's something that we can start to work on soon. I think at the highest levels in the United States, the strategic decision has been made to focus on the Indo-Pacific going forward, and that's shared across both parties. The Atlantic Alliance, as you know, is extremely important to the United States, but it has been in that context and knowledge of the fact that our future is very much in the Indo-Pacific, that we've been talking to our closest allies in Europe about the need to invest more heavily in their own defense, actually for 2 decades now. And we've had an enormous amount of success, particularly in the last few years, in seeing much larger expenditures on defense in Europe, and a much greater geopolitical sobriety as well in Brussels and in a lot of the capitals in Europe, about the fact that the world that came into being post-1991 is no longer. And it is up to the democracies, and I would say particularly the US and India, to set about to shape a new order. And with that, I really hope that I can see the 3 of you again, that we can have you back to Hudson Institute for more conversations about China, about India, about the United States. We're all deeply appreciative of the time you've spent with us. And I look forward to seeing all 3 of you in person very soon. Thank you. And namaste. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.